So fellas, this weekend, Usman returns against Joaquin Buckley. What I would say is a pretty solid fight night. If I had to rate the card for a fight night, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. It's a card with some decent names on. I think there's a lot of finishes that can potentially take place on this card. It's a solid fight night, and we're going to be breaking down every fighter as well as my predictions. And we'll start off with Vanessa Demupoulos versus Jamie Lyn-Horth. Vanessa Demupoulos had a pretty solid career before the UFC, beat Sam Hughes, who's now on a roll, to become a champion on the regional scene. Ended up losing on the Contender Series against Corey McKenna. Went 1-1 on the regional scene after that, losing to Lupita Godinez. Lost her UFC debut. Then she went on a bit of a run in the UFC, but recently she's now on a 2-fight losing streak, one of them being by finish. Going to be taking on Jamie Lyn-Horth, who had an undefeated run in the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, becoming a champion, and so far is 2-2 in the UFC. But to be fair to her, she's been losing to fairly high-level fighters like, well, I say a high level, you've got Miranda Maverick, who's on the co-main event of this card, Veronica Hardy, who's wants a prospect. I'm going to go Jamie Lyn-Horth to win this one by decision. Listen, it's low-level women MMA. Vanessa Demupoulos has just been getting worked a lot recently, both in the striking, both in the grappling, and she's now moving up a weight class against Jamie Lyn-Horth, who, even though, you know, isn't ever going to be anything massive in this division, she is, I'd say, a lot more, well, she has got a lot more volume striking. I think she's going to be able to work Vanessa Demupoulos on the feet, land a lot more shots, be the more accurate striker, be the more consistent striker. I'm picking it to win this one by decision. I don't see this fight taking place on the ground. Two strikers, Vanessa Demupoulos, who has awful striking, Jamie Lyn-Horth, who's got pretty solid striking as well, and even in that fight with Veronica Hardy that Jamie Lyn-Horth did have, she didn't look that bad against Veronica Hardy, and like I said before, Veronica Hardy is a pretty good striker for the division, so I'm going to go Jamie Lyn-Horth to win this one. Pieces Vanessa Demupoulos up across 15 minutes. Gets the decision win. I don't see there being anything significant taking place in this fight. It's women MMA. Jamie Lyn-Horth wins this one by decision. Then we've got Phil Rowe versus Ange Loosa, which is actually kind of a similar matchup in the sense that it's going to be a very close striking matchup. You've got Phil Rowe, who ended up losing his first 2 fights in professional MMA. After that, went on a massive run with nothing but finishes. Ended up getting a KO win in the Contender Series, then loses his UFC debut. And then after that, goes on a 3-fight winning streak, all by way of finish. Ends up going on a 2-fight losing streak to Neil Magny and Jake Matthews. Goes on a shit ton of, well, he's also grappled a lot and lost a shit ton of grappling matches, but he has won his most recent grappling match. He's going to be taking on Ange Loosa, who came from a bit of a boxing and a kickboxing background, won most of his fights in the regional scene, ended up facing JDM himself on the Contender Series, where he ends up losing to JDM, and then after that, he's kind of been a bit of a win-loss fighter, but he did quit against Brian Battle, who was losing that fight, who was looking for a way out. He quit against Brian Battle last year, and he lost his most recent fight to Bonfim as he takes on Phil Rowe. I'm going to go with Ange Loosa to win this one by decision. It's a very close matchup. Ange Loosa is an absolute dog, though. I'll give that to him. Even though he did look for a way out in that fight with Brian Battle, usually he's got pretty solid kickboxing. He's a bit of a dog. Has pop in his shots. I wouldn't say a one-shot KO power. Phil Rowe was once a decent prospect. He looked really good in that fight with Nico Price, and he has looked good earlier on in his career, but the second the level steps up, he falls short. You know, got pieced up. Well, I wouldn't say got pieced up, but he got worked by Neil Magny. Jake Matthews is able to beat him. He's been out for quite some time as well. I think it's been like over a year since Phil Rowe was in the octagon. And on top of that, Ange Loosa has been facing the better competition. You know, facing Brian Battle, facing Gabriel Bonfim, managed to survive against him as well. It's going to be close. It's a bit of a coin flip fight. I just think Ange Loosa is the better striker. He's been facing at a better level, and I see more keys to victory for Ange Loosa in this fight. Then we've got an absolute banger, which is on short notice, as Ricky Simon takes on Cameron Smotherman. Was supposed to be at Charles Jourdain. Smotherman steps in on a few days' notice. Ricky Simon had a massive run on the regional scene, becoming a champion. Ended up submitting no other than Mr. Merab Dvalishvili himself in his UFC debut, which is one of the best aging wins probably in the UFC right now. After that win over Merab, he goes on an absolute tear in the UFC with a couple of finishes over, you know, decent opponents. Also ended up getting finished by Uriah Faber, which kind of went viral. And then he kind of had a bit of a losing streak. He got knocked out by Song Yudong, worked by Mario Batista, lost to Vinicius Oliveira, but he came back with one of the most brutal KOs I've seen this year, as he absolutely destroyed Javid Bashrat, knocked them out cold unconscious. He's going to be out for the rest of the year. He's going to be taking on Cameron Smotherman, who had a pretty decent run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Ended up getting finished on the Contender Series the first time he was on. Went back to the regional scene, got 3 straight wins, stepped in on short notice against Jake Hadley, beat Jake Hadley on short notice, but lost his most recent fight against Sergey City a couple of weeks back. Yeah, I'm going to go with Ricky Simon to win this one by decision. He's had a full training camp, but he's just at a much higher level than Cameron Smotherman. If you ain't getting past Sergey City, I don't see him getting past Ricky Simon. I think there's way more keys to victory for Ricky Simon in this fight. If he wants to take the fight to the mat, I really do feel like he's going to be able to work Cameron Smotherman, who we've seen struggle with grappling against Sergey City as well, and before in the regional scene. Ricky Simon's a beast of a grappler. Like I said before, submitted Merab himself. And even on the feet, Ricky Simon's got pretty solid pressure boxing. Cameron Smotherman's not. I feel like he kind of looked technical against Jake Hadley, then we kind of found out in his recent fight wasn't wasn't as good as we thought. I don't see him working Ricky Simon on the feet. He's not one of these top fighters like a Song Yudong, Mario Batista, or Vinicius Oliveira, which are all losses that have aged well for Ricky Simon. So I'm going to go Ricky Simon, dominant unanimous decision, and the fact that it's on short notice puts the cherry on top. Ricky Simon wins this one, and I think he does it pretty comfortably. Cody Durden against Jose Ochoa. Now, Cody Durden had another massive run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Then he kind of went down the boxing route, had a couple of boxing matches, kickboxing matches, and then he comes over to the UFC, and he's had a pretty good career in the... Well, he started off with a pretty good career in the UFC with a couple of wins, ended up taking a couple of losses, though. Got submitted by Tagir Ulanbekov, and also ended up getting knocked out by Bruno Silva. Comes back with a good win in his next fight, submitting his opponent, and then after that, he's just been pieced up by Joshua Van in his most recent fight. He's going to be taking on Jose Ochoa from Chute Box, who had a pretty solid career in the regional scene, looked very, very dangerous for a flyweight coming into the UFC with a 100% finishing rate. Like I said, for a flyweight, is impressive. And he has lost his UFC debut, but he lost it to Lonnie Kavanagh, which, to be fair, Lonnie Kavanagh is one of the best flyweight prospects right now. Not that shameful. It is a close fight because I really do feel like Jose Ochoa can piece up Cody Durden on the feet. Cody Durden's been a punchbag on the feet for a lot of people, like Bruno Silva, like Joshua Van, but I am going to go with Cody Durden to win this one. It is a big step up in your second UFC fight. To lose to Lonnie Kavanagh and then go for Cody Durden, who is a very beatable fighter and has got pretty basic striking, but Cody Durden, he's got that kind of pressure striking, likes to mix it up with the grappling. We saw it in the fight with Jake Hadley and Matt Schnell. He likes to take the fight to the mat. He likes to mix the striking it with the grappling, and I feel like for your second fight in the UFC, against Cody Durden, when you haven't even won in the UFC yet, it's quite a big step up in competition. Maybe Jose can catch Cody Durden and piece him up on the feet, and it wouldn't surprise me because, like I said, we saw Bruno Silva get the job done against Cody Durden, but I am going to lean towards Cody Durden getting this one done by decision. Mixes the striking it with the grappling, kind of overwhelms Jose Ochoa. I'm going to go with Cody Durden to win this one by decision. Then we've got Malcolm Wellmaker versus Kris Moutinho. The matchmakers, this is one of the few fights the UFC have put where you can actually congratulate the matchmakers. You've got Malcolm Wellmaker, one of the best prospects. You've got Kris Moutinho, who obviously went viral for that fight with Sean O'Malley. Solid matchmaking for this card. You've got Malcolm Wellmaker, pretty straightforward career. Big run on the regional scene, becoming a champion, knocked his opponent out in the Contender Series and just brutally knocked out Cameron Simon a couple of weeks back and quit his job after he got the 50k bonus. One of the better bantamweight prospects right now. And Kris Moutinho had a pretty decent run in the regional scene, losing a few times and debuted in the UFC in one of the most iconic fights in the UFC, as he absolutely took a beating against Sean O'Malley but kept walking forward and kind of became a fan favourite for it. Unfortunately, got finished in his next fight after Sean O'Malley, so he got cut from the UFC. But since getting cut from the UFC, he's gone 5-0 with 5 straight finishes, and the UFC have given him another chance against Malcolm Wellmaker. Kind of feels like they've brought him back against, you know, someone. They're just kind of trying to build the name of Malcolm Wellmaker. And if Malcolm Wellmaker can, you know, put Kris Moutinho out, that's going to look good, because if Sean O'Malley couldn't do it and Wellmaker does, that's going to rise the stock of Malcolm Wellmaker. But I'm going to go with Wellmaker by KO in the first round. He's one of the better bantamweight prospects right now. I think he's definitely, well, I'd say he's probably got more potential than Peyton Tao, but obviously they both beat Cameron Simon. They both destroyed him. But the way that Malcolm Wellmaker was able to time him, sleep him in the first round, and even on the Contenders Series, he looks very promising, does Malcolm Wellmaker. Slick boxing, very fast as well on the feet, as well as decent power. He's got quite a high finishing rate too, so I think Malcolm Wellmaker gets the job done. Now, Kris Moutinho, as we've seen in the UFC, kind of gets... Listen, he's got a good chin from what I've seen, but he kind of gets known for taking shots and eating shots. Fair enough, one of them was against Sean O'Malley, but when he got finished by Kanete, another low-level fighter, it wasn't the best. Now, he's on a run in the regional scene, so maybe Kris Moutinho's going to come in with a different game plan. Maybe he's a much more evolved fighter, but I think Malcolm Wellmaker is one of the best prospects in the bantamweight division. I think he's going to time Kris Moutinho in the first round, which isn't that hard to do, as we've seen before, and he's going to knock him out in the first round. Malcolm Wellmaker gets the job done. KO in the first round against Kris Moutinho. Then we've got Michael Chiesa against Court Mcgee. Holy GFL. Michael Chiesa is a massive submission background. He's never actually TKO'd anyone as well, so he might be the most pillow-fisted fighter in the UFC right now. But he starts off his MMA career with a bunch of finishes, comes from the Ultimate Fighter as well. We ended up winning the Ultimate Fighter on one of the seasons. After that, has a pretty decent run in the UFC, finishing the likes of Beneil Dariush. I'm pretty sure he's the only guy to submit Beneil Dariush, as well as a couple of guys like Jim Miller. Ends up getting submitted by Jorge Masvidal as well. Then gets 2 submission losses in a row. And I will say this about Michael Michael Chiesa. Even though he's good, he's got decent submissions offensively, defensively, he gets submitted all the time. After that, goes on a 4-fight winning streak between 2018 and 2021, and then eventually gets submitted by Vicente Luque, submitted by Kevin Holland, and beaten by Sean Brady. But he is now on a 2-fight winning streak as he submitted Tony Ferguson himself, and recently beat Max Griffin, and he's now kind of presenting on ESPN, kind of like Anthony Smith was, as like a part-time kind of background commentator, whilst also fighting at the same time. Taking on Court Mcgee, who also came from The Ultimate Fighter and also won The Ultimate Fighter. After winning The Ultimate Fighter, had a decent start to his UFC career, going 4-2, managed to beat Robert Whittaker, but since then, he has been on a pretty long downward spiral. I've kind of confused how the UFC have kept him in for so long. Lost a lot of fights, but he's coming off a good win in his most recent fight against another kind of old veteran in Tim Means. I'm going to go with Michael Chiesa by submission in the second round. Court Mcgee's beyond washed, 40 years of age. That win over Brahim Marge is aging well, but Tim Means isn't the best opponent, and even though Court Mcgee's got decent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 40 years old, the stand-up is non-existent. I feel like Michael Chiesa, despite having no power, could maybe work Court Mcgee on the feet, but I really do feel like it's going to be a submission. He's just a much better wrestler, much better grappler than Court Mcgee. Neither of them are really in their prime, but the fact that Chiesa's got a bit of momentum, he's looked decent in his last 2 fights, especially against Max Griffin, who was able to take him down a few times and obviously got the submission at the end. So I think Chiesa gets the submission. 2 old guys with a BJJ background. I just think Chiesa's the better one. Court Mcgee, I mean, you look at some of his losses as well. Lost to Alex Morono, that's not a loss that's kind of aged well. Morono's losing left, right, and centre these days. I'm not really sure if Court Mcgee's still UFC worthy. It kind of feels like they've kept him in because of pity. And I know that Michael Chiesa, not exactly in the prime of his career, beat Ferguson and Griffin, but I just feel like he's a better submission artist. Gets the job done against Court Mcgee, gets the submission in the second round. He kind of takes a bit of time to get going, does Michael Chiesa. He's not like a quick first-round finisher. He kind of takes time to shoot the takedown initially, but I think eventually he'll get the submission. Second round submission for Michael Chiesa. Paul Craig versus Rodolfo Bellato. Talking of submission ability, Paul Craig was initially a BJJ practitioner before coming over to MMA. Had an undefeated run in the regional scene with nothing but finishes, with a 100% finishing rate, becoming a champion. Gets a submission in his UFC debut, then gets finished by Tyson Pedro and Khalil Roundtree. Then he submits none other than Mr. Magomed Ankalaev himself in his first win in the UFC. After that, goes on a bit of a run. Loses to Menifield and Jimmy Crute, but has a couple of good wins, including submitting Jamal Hill and submitting Nikita Krylov. But then after that, it's been a bit of a downfall in the past few years. He ends up losing to Volkan Oezdemir in the light heavyweight division, getting finished by Johnny Walker. Comes back down to middleweight where he finishes Andre Muniz. Headlines a fight night against Brendan Allen. Gets absolutely demolished by Brendan Allen and submitted. Then gets knocked out by Caio Bravo. And in his most recent fight, he got worked on the feet by Mr. Bon Nickel. He's going to be taking on Rodolfo Bellato, what had a big finishing streak on the regional scene. Ended up losing to Vitor Petrino. And then he debuts in the Contender Series against none other than Mr. Vitor Petrino again. And without surprise, gets knocked out again by Vitor Petrino. After that, he goes 2-0 on the regional scene, becoming a champion. Comes back to the Contender Series, gets a finish. Gets Iho Portieri out there in the first round. And then he gets a draw with Jimmy Crute in his most recent fight. Rodolfo Bellato isn't a big light heavyweight prospect. I can't see him going too far in this division. But with that being said, I do think he's going to get a late TKO over Paul Craig. This was scheduled a couple of weeks back. It got pulled out on the fight day because I think Bellato had an illness, but yeah, I think he gets this one done. Rodolfo Bellato stylistically quite a bad matchup for Paul Craig. On the feet, he's going to work Paul Craig. Paul Craig has some of the worst striking. He never improves it. And Rodolfo Bellato, he's got some pop in his shots. He had that fight with Jimmy Crute, which was a pretty back and forth fight. And in that fight with Jimmy Crute, he showed us that he's got a decent gas tank. He lost the first round dominantly to Jimmy Crute, came back in the last 2 rounds and worked him. And I feel like across 3 rounds, he's going to work Paul Craig on the feet. I don't see there being much grappling threat from Paul Craig. He has no wrestling, no striking. He purely relies on pulling guard and hoping that people are going to get submitted, but it never works. People have found out the stick of Paul Craig. Now, when Rodolfo Bellato comes from a bit of a BJJ background himself, I feel like he's going to be able to hold him on, keep his fight standing, TKOs Paul Craig on the feet, and gets the job done. The only chance Paul Craig has in this fight is if he pulls off a Hail Mary submission, and obviously, if anybody's going to pull off a Hail Mary submission, it's going to be Paul Craig, but it hasn't worked for him recently. Like I said, I feel like people are kind of starting to find out about Paul Craig. Don't go to the ground with him, just stay on the feet and pick him apart and you'll get the job done. Bo Nickel was able to do it. I think a more powerful and just an overall better striker in Rodolfo Bellato, who has decent BJJ himself, is going to be able to get the job done. I think he finishes Paul Craig in the third round TKO to Rodolfo Bellato. Alonzo Menifield takes on Oumar Sy. Now, Alonzo Menifield had quite a weird career in MMA. Went 3-0 in the regional scene with 3 finishes, comes through on the Contender Series but doesn't get a contract. So he goes back to the regional scene, gets 2 more finishes, comes back to the Contender Series, gets a KO in 8 seconds. After that, he starts off his career by knocking out Paul Craig and gets another KO in his second fight. fight. Then he goes on a 2-fight losing streak. Goes on a bit of a run in the UFC, to be fair, with a lot of good finishes as well, like against Serkinov, Cheran, Movzarov, and obviously Jimmy Crute when he kind of partially retired Jimmy Crute. And then he ends up getting knocked out in 12 seconds by Carlos Ulberg and just got slept by Azamat Murzakanov, which, to be fair, are two rising prospects at light heavyweight, but he got finished in his last two. Well, actually, not in his last two, because he come off a win over Julius Walker in his most recent fight on short notice. He's going to be taking on Oumar Sy, who had an unbeaten run in the regional scene with a lot of finishes. Finished Tuco Takos in his UFC debut, and then recently got a win at UFC Paris last year for his second win in the UFC. I'm going to go with Oumar Sy to beat Alonzo Menifield. Menifield has looked terrible in his recent fights. Now, like I said, he got finished by Ulberg and Murzakanov, which those guys are on a roll right now. One of them's in the top 3. Murzakanov's on a roll. That's not shameful, but he debuted against Julius Walker, and that was Julius Walker coming from the regional scene, who didn't have a training camp, and he nearly got beaten by Julius Walker. He was completely gassed after the first round. I feel like Oumar Sy is just a much better fighter. He's a much more technical striker than Alonzo Menifield. Alonzo Menifield's kind of like that brawly swinger, and I feel like a guy who's technical on the feet, pretty decent kickboxer. Oumar Sy is going to pick him apart, and he's got a much better gas tank. We saw in his most recent fight with Jung, he was able to keep the same pace across 3 rounds. Might be quite slow for the division, but Alonzo Menifield has not impressed me recently. Even in that fight with Dustin Jacoby, I know Dustin Jacoby's on a roll now, but he barely beat Dustin Jacoby. I think he landed one massive overhand, dropped him, and then after the fight, it was just a bit of a competitive fight. So I think Oumar Sy picks apart Alonzo Menifield. Much better kickboxer, much better gas tank. Menifield hasn't been impressing me recently. I don't really think he's top 15 worthy, so I'm going to go Oumar Sy to win a decision. Don't see there being anything significant in this fight. I don't think it's going to be an absolute banger. Oumar Sy just picks him apart and gets the decision. But then even if he goes to the ground, I feel like Oumar Sy's got a better ground game than Alonzo Menifield as well. Menifield might have a bit of a wrestling game plan, but Oumar Sy's got decent BJJ. Sy gets the job done. Cody Brundage versus Mansur Abdul Malik. Cody Brundage went 5-0 on the regional scene, becoming a double champion. Ended up getting finished on the contender series, so he goes back to the regional scene, picks up a win. And so far in the UFC, he's just been a bit of a win-loss fighter, but he always ends up in finishes. Either he's finishing the fight or he's getting finished. You know, he's had a bunch of finishes in the UFC so far against some decent names. He's also been finished a few times in the UFC in a couple of fights. He's coming off a KO win over Julian Marquez in his most recent fights. He takes on Mansur Abdul Malik, who comes from a bit of a wrestling background and has a 100% finishing rate, as he's undefeated so far in MMA. Went 5-0 on the regional scene, and as you'd expect, nothing but finishes. Got a KO win in the contender series, got a KO win in his UFC debut against Todorovic, and recently knocked out Nick Klein for his second win in the UFC. I think Mansur Abdul Malik absolutely destroys Cody Brundage in this fight. Mansur Abdul Malik might have the most dangerous ground and pound in the UFC. He has a pretty good game plan of working people on the feet, getting them wobbled on the feet, and then shooting a takedown, getting them down to the mat, and then absolutely blasting them with ground and pound. Cody Brundage is way too vulnerable for me. He nearly got finished against Julian Marquez. He got clocked by Julian Marquez in that first round as well. He's a little bit chinny. He's a little bit too vulnerable for me. I think we're going to see Mansur Abdul Malik take the fight to the ground, or maybe just wobble Cody Brundage on the feet and then go for the ground and pound finish. He's got, like I said before, some of the most dangerous ground and pound in the UFC. Puts his all into every shot. He's had a couple of ground and pound TKOs in the regional scene as well. So I think whether he wobbles Cody Brundage on the feet and then takes the fight to the mat, or he just simply shoots the takedown and gets him down, I see Mansur Abdul Malik getting this one done. He's a bit of a sloppy striker, is Mansur Abdul Malik, which kind of doesn't really give me too much hope. But Cody Brundage is weird because the way he fights, you wouldn't think he's a dangerous fighter, but he does manage to get it done a lot of the times. But again, you see some of the guys he's beating. Zachary Reese, we know him for being chinny. Julian Marquez isn't really in the UFC anymore. The loser of Cody Brundage and Marquez, we're going to get cut from the UFC. Jacob Malkoun, grappler with no hands. Mansur Abdul Malik gets this one done. Either drops him and then goes for the ground and pound finish, or takes him down and goes to the ground and pound finish. But mark my words, Mansur Abdul Malik, who's one of the best middleweight prospects right now, will TKO Cody Brundage in the first round, potentially cutting from the UFC. Former champion Cody Garbrandt takes on Raoni Barcelos. Now, obviously, Garbrandt became a champion after having one of the best performances in UFC history, a matrix performance, they call it, against Dominic Cruz to become the bantamweight champion of the world. And after that, kind of went on for having a bit of a downfall. He gets knocked out not once but twice by TJ Dillashaw. Then he gets knocked out as well by Pedro Munoz. Then has a massive knockout in his next fight. Just to go on another 2-fight losing streak, including getting finished by Kaka France in the flyweight division. Got back on a winning streak as he knocks out Brian Kelleher and beats Trevin Jones. And in the most recent fight, he got submitted by former flyweight champion Davison Figueiredo at UFC 300. Going to be taking on Raoni Barcelos, who comes from a bit of a BJJ background. Had a big run on the regional scene, becoming a double champion on the regional scene. Had a good run to the start of his UFC career as well. Went 5-0 in the UFC. Ended up getting some pretty decent wins as well. Then he kind of went on a bit of a downfall. He lost 4 of his next 5 fights, including getting brutally knocked out by Oumar Nurmagomedov. Picked it up with a win over Quinones, and in his most recent fight, he took on Peyton Talbot as a massive underdog and throw-checked Peyton Talbot as he absolutely out-wrestled him across 15 minutes. Nearly finished him as well. This is a tough fight for Cody Garbrandt, but I am going to trust that he gets the job done. I think Garbrandt gets this one done by decision, and I say this because I feel like you look at Cody Garbrandt, and every single time he faces somebody who's maybe not a top fighter, he gets the job done, and stylistically, I see this being favourable for Cody Garbrandt. Raoni Barcelos, bit of a chinny fighter in the UFC. Cody Garbrandt, rapid, and he's a pretty powerful striker himself in the bantamweight division. He's still got pop in his shots. I don't see Raoni Barcelos putting Peyton Talbot out, not Peyton Talbot, Cody Garbrandt out. I think Garbrandt can light him up on the feet. Even in the grappling department, there's been this whole kind of talk of Cody Garbrandt having bad grappling, when historically he's kind of known for having decent takedown defense. I know he got taken down by Figueiredo in his most recent fight, but Figueiredo is one of the best submission grapplers in the bantamweight division, at least when he had momentum coming up from the flyweight division. Raoni Barcelos, he hasn't really had a decent win yet, so I'm going to go with Raoni Barcelos to get this one done. I know we just dogged Peyton Talbot, but you can't really compare Peyton Talbot and Cody Garbrandt when it comes to grappling. And even just in general, I think Cody Garbrandt definitely has a lot more pop in his shots than Raoni Barcelos. Could even get a knockout in this fight. I think stylistically this is quite favourable for Garbrandt to get the job done and knock out Raoni Barcelos, but I think he's going to light him up across 15 minutes, probably drop him at one point. Barcelos, obviously going to come with a grapple-heavy game plan, but I don't see Cody Garbrandt getting dominated with grappling the same way that Peyton Talbot did. Even though he's on a 2-fight winning streak, he's definitely on the way out of Barcelos. I think Garbrandt lights him up, potentially even gets the KO win. Cody Garbrandt by decision, but I wouldn't bet the house on it because, like I said, Barcelos, pretty solid grappler. Cody Garbrandt, he's kind of also at that stage in his career where he is losing fights more consistently than winning, so it is what it is. I'm picking Garbrandt by decision. Edmen Shahbazyan versus Andre Petroski. You can almost bet the house that this is going to end in some sort of finish. Edmen Shahbazyan has a 86% KO rate. Obviously known for finishing his fights. Had a massive run on the regional scene. Ended up winning on the contender series. And also won in the Ultimate Fighter as well immediately after that on short notice. Then he gets a finish in his first 3 fights in the UFC. Becomes a bit of a prospect. Then he kind of has a bit of a downfall. Gets beaten badly by Derek Brunson. Then loses 4 of his next 5 fights. He then comes back with another massive finish until he gets finished by GM3, but he has just knocked out Dylan Budka brutally early this year in his most recent fight. Going to be taking on Andre Petroski. He won another decent run in the regional scene, loses in LFA, but was a regional champion. Comes over through the Ultimate Fighter, goes 1-1 in the Ultimate Fighter, loses to Brian Battle, but gets a UFC contract anyway. And was once a bit of a middleweight prospect. Went 5-0 in the UFC until eventually he got knocked out by Michel Pereira and also knocked himself out when he shot a takedown against Jacob Malkoun. But he has since then picked up a 3-fight winning streak. This is a very kind of 50-50 fight. Edmen Shahbazyan is a really good prospect. I remember he had a bunch of hype because of his striking, but he kind of fell short to grapplers. Obviously, Derek Brunson got him. He got mauled by Anthony Hernandez. GM3 submitted him. So it does seem to be a bit, it does seem to be kind of grapplers that kind of pose the biggest threat to Edmen Shahbazyan. And I know Petroski's got a bit of a wrestling-heavy game plan. He just worked Rodolfo Vieira on the feet. But I'm going to go with Edmen Shahbazyan to get this one done by KO in the first round. I am hoping that he's improved his grappling. I know Dylan Budka's not the best win, but I think stylistically he's a much more dangerous and much better striker than Andre Petroski. He's one of the most dangerous unranked strikers in the middleweight division. I'm going to go as far to say that. He has so much pop in his shots. He nearly finished Anthony Hernandez as well. He was absolutely working Hernandez for about a minute until he obviously got mauled by Hernandez as well, so I think Shahbazyan gets this one done. KOs Petroski in the first round. Petroski, kind of chinny, like I said, knocked himself out before, and the second he faces somebody elite on the feet, he gets done. Josh Frem, not the best win. Dylan Budka, cut from the UFC. Rodolfo Vieira, it was a close fight, and he kept that fight standing against a grappler. I think Shahbazyan's going to KO him in the first round, but if Petroski's able to take the fight to the mat, I think he could wear out Edmen Shahbazyan, potentially get a late TKO. I just think Shahbazyan, pretty decent striker, pretty dangerous on the feet, bad matchup for Petroski. KO in the first round for Edmen Shahbazyan. Then the co-main event, Rose Namajunas against Miranda Maverick. Rose Namajunas, obviously 2-time champion in the strawweight division, ended up losing in one of the most boring fights in UFC history to Carla Esparza. Then after that, immediately loses to Manon Fiorot as she moved up to the flyweight division. Then goes on a 2-fight winning streak, beats Amanda Ribas and Tracy Cortez, and lost in the most recent fight to Erin Blanchford at UFC Canada last year. Going to be taking on Miranda Maverick, who had another big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. And since joining the UFC, she had a bit of she's kind of been a bit of a streaky fighter, where she only really lost to the elites, like Jasmine Judovicius, Erin Blanchford, and Macy Barber, who are all top fighters right now. And since then, she's now been on a 4-fight winning streak with a finish in there as well. I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas by decision. I just think she's much more reliable. than Miranda Maverick. Every single time Miranda Maverick faces a high-level fighter, she ends up losing. She lost to Blanchfield, she lost to Bob, she lost to Jasmine Judavicius. I know she kind of lost via the grappling in that fight, but I think Rose Namajunas, she's going to be able to pick apart Miranda Maverick across 15 minutes. I don't really trust that Miranda Maverick is going to be able to work Rose Namajunas in this fight. I think she will try and implement the grappling with Miranda Maverick. I don't see it being too much success. Namajunas keeps the fight standing, picks apart Miranda Maverick across 15 minutes, and gets the job done. And then the main event, Kamaru Usman returns against Joaquin Buckley after a few years off. Former welterweight champion versus Joaquin Buckley. Obviously, Usman is the second greatest welterweight of all time. Won the belt and had some iconic moments, sending Masvidal to the Shadow Realm, knocking out Gilbert Burns, breaking the jaw of Colby Covington. Obviously, has that big fight with Leon Edwards, where he dominated Leon Edwards for at least 4 rounds, and then took that infamous head kick KO, and then lost a rematch to Usman and to Leon, and then lost his most recent fight in a controversial loss on short notice against Khamzat Chimaev. But he's been out since 2023. And obviously, Buckley, he had a career in the middleweight division, but he was a bit of a middleweight journeyman. And since moving down to welterweight, it's been his call. Knocked out Andre Fiallo, beats Alex Morono by decision, ends up finishing Vicente Luque, beats Ruzi Boyev, finishes Stephen Thompson, and just finished Colby Covington in a Fight Night main event. He's been on a roll, he's Buckley, and I have no reason to not pick Buckley in this fight. I think Buckley gets, I think he gets Usman out there. I'm going TKO in the 3rd round for Joaquin Buckley. Kamaru Usman, he's got bad knees. He's approaching 40 years old. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He hasn't won a fight since 2021. And even on top of all that, this is a terrible stylistic matchup for Usman. Buckley's a good wrestler. He comes from a bit of a wrestling background. He's so physically strong for the welterweight division, and he's got pop in his shots. He's a solid strike. He's got great boxing for the division. He packs a punch. This is a terrible fight for Kamaru Usman. I don't see a key to victory for Usman in this fight, unless he's able to wear out Joaquin Buckley across 5 rounds, which, considering the current status of his knees and the fact that he's been out for so long, and the fact that Buckley's a decent wrestler in himself, he was pretty much able to avoid most of the grappling from Covington. We saw Joaquin Buckley showcase the wrestling in the fight with Nozil and Ruzi Boyev. So I think Buckley gets this one done. TKOs Usman, lights him up on the feet just like he did with Colby Covington, and eventually he's going to land a massive shot, wobble Usman, and get the job done in the 3rd round by TKO. Usman is way beyond his prime now. Like I said, he hasn't won a fight since 2021 against Colby Covington. He got knocked out by Leon, lost a rematch, lost to Chimaev, and even though that Chimaev loss has kind of aged well because it was on short notice and he arguably won the fight, he's been out since October of 2023. Buckley's been on a rise. He seems unstoppable, literally has future champion potential in this division. I think he lights up Usman on the feet, keeps the fight standing, avoids any grappling threat that Usman has to bring, lights him up on the feet, and eventually gets to TKO in the 3rd round just by completely overpowering him on the feet. Don't really see a key to victory. I think this will be the last fight of Usman's career as well. I think if he does get finished by Buckley, which he probably will, there's no reason to stick around. I think he's going to be a bit of a retirement fight. This is probably the last time we see Joaquin Buckley. And if Buckley, not Buckley, last time we see Usman. And if Buckley does win, I mean, potential title fight for Buckley. I know there's a lot of welterweight contenders right now. You've got Ian Gary, you've got Shafkat, you've got Sean Brady. It's a bit of a logjam. But if he wins this fight, it's either a #1 contender fight or maybe a title fight for Buckley. Maybe you do Buckley versus Bilal, Buckley versus Brady. I'm not sure what you do, but he's definitely big implications for Buckley if he wins this fight. I really do think he will. Buckley, TKO in the 3rd round. Now, if I had to rank all my picks via confidence, my confidence picks are Buckley, Abdul Malik, Marco Chiesa, Wellmaker, Durden, and Jamie Lyn-Horth. My medium confidence picks are going to be Rose Namajunas, Oumar Sy, Rodolfo, Bellato, Ricky Simon, and Ange Loosa. And the picks that I've kind of got low confidence with are going to be Edmen, Shahbazyan, and Cody, Garbrandt. Now, if I had to predict some bonuses on this card, I think the first bonus will go to Joaquin Buckley. If there's a finish in the main event, the UFC Aura is going to give them a bonus, and I feel like Joaquin Buckley is definitely a very dangerous matchup for Usman, as I just said. Powerful striker, solid boxer, good wrestling, explosive. Terrible stylistic matchup for Usman. I think he gets the job done and will get a bonus. The second bonus, I think we'll go to Malcolm Wellmaker. The UFC have been pushing Malcolm Wellmaker a bit. They've recently posted like a YouTube compilation of him as well. So I think if he is able to get Kris Moutinho out of there, which I think he will, they're going to give a bit of a bonus to Malcolm Wellmaker to kind of help build the hype. And I think the third bonus will go to Edmen Shahbazyan on the featured fight. I really do feel like he's got the potential to knock out Andre Petroski. Solid, rangy, dangerous striker on the feet. Petroski's a bit chinny. I think he gets the job done. I think the prospect of the card to look out for is going to be, like I said before, Malcolm Wellmaker. Undefeated, looked really good in his first 2 fights in the UFC, even though I think he was a favourite to beat Cameron Simon. The way that he beat Cameron Simon, knocked him out, sent him halfway across the octagon. Terrible matchup for a lot of people. Great striker. Kris Moutinho knows getting hit, but I would look out for Malcolm Wellmaker. I think the fight of the night will be Ricky Simon versus Smotherman. Ricky Simon's always in a dogfight. Whether it's him losing or whether it's him winning, he pressures forward with a pressure boxing approach and absolutely works people. And Cameron Smotherman, has a style that kind of encourages that. Not the most technical guy, but does like to kind of strike at range. I feel like a guy in Ricky Simon who's always going to be pressuring Kamaru Usman. I think it's going to be quite a good fight across 15 minutes. And then the snooze fest of the night is probably going to be Demupoulos versus Jamie Lyn-Horth. Low-level women MMA. Terrible grappler versus mid-striker. Who actually cares about that fight? But those are my predictions I'm breaking down of UFC Atlanta, Buckley versus Usman. Like I said before, pretty decent fight night. You know, one of the first crowded fight nights we've had in a couple of weeks. So, going to be a good card. Looking forward to it. Let me know your predictions. Thank you for watching.